I'm so excited for this video. So today we're going to be talking about my faith deconstruction and what led me to leave the Mormon church. So this is going to be quite the video. Honestly, I feel like it's going to be really hard to talk about, honestly, because I didn't really ever think that I would be leaving the church at all, because I wasn't really looking to leave the church. I wasn't really trying to rebel. I was just trying to be faithful, trying to live with integrity, just to get answers to questions that I was not supposed to be asking. And the truth is I didn't leave because I was offended. The number one reason why I left is because I felt betrayed. And the integrity of the entire church kind of disintegrated for me after learning about the truth about Joseph Smith and everything else like that. So this part of the series, this is part of a series. This is actually part 2 of my series about religion versus spirituality. And today I'm going to be sharing my personal experience of why I left the Mormon church. This is not supposed to be a rant. This is more of just supposed to be my experience and just all the little things that kind of pull up for me. Again, it's not necessarily about bitterness or rebellion. It's just about truth, what happened, all the things, and what happened when I started actually questioning things. So let me introduce myself. Hello, my name is Kirsten Morley, your certified emotion code, body code, belief code practitioner, which basically means I help people clear emotional baggage and subconscious beliefs that are holding people back. Obviously, I'm not a licensed therapist, and that there is a disclaimer in the description of this video. So if you want to go read that, you can. But again, this is not about attacking anyone's beliefs, especially for my active friends and family. I'm simply just sharing my experience, all the little things that pulled up for me that were just ooh, for me, I feel like overall religion caused a lot more harm than healing. And one of the biggest things that I had to unlearn was is the way that divine authority is used to manipulate, shame, or guilt, and control. And to me, I believe that that's actually the real disrespect to God, not necessarily people questioning, but people using God's name to justify harm, which, anybody would believe that. But sometimes when you actually take a step back and look at the things that you have done in the church, you would actually see that that's actually some things are very harmful. There's a lot of good things, but there's also a lot of negative things. So I understand that there's going to be some people in the comments that are like, that, it's not the church, it's the people, and not everyone is like that. I get that. I totally get that, but the church perpetuates abuse. It's a breeding ground for spiritual abuse, emotional abuse, mental abuse, and especially sexual abuse. We're not going to talk about that today, but it is a breeding ground for that. So for friends and family that are still active in the church, please don't watch this. I love you. Okay. So before I get into all of this, this is very personal, and I want to acknowledge that the church was a very, very, very big part of my life, and I did learn a lot of beautiful things, and I'm very grateful for the good that it brought into my life. But alongside that, there were a lot of deeply harmful and toxic experiences that I believe it's okay to hold space for both of them, okay? So I'm going to be talking about my shelf a lot. So if you don't know what that is, there was actually a talk that was given about putting things that you don't really fully understand on a shelf for God to talk, to work out later. You put it, if you don't understand something, put it on the shelf, and then God's going to take care of it for you. He'll answer your questions later. And eventually, obviously, my shelf got so heavy that it broke, so I no longer believe anymore. There's an analogy for you. Okay. And so some of the first heavy things that I actually put on my shelf, actually, I should probably clarify. I was a devout member, born and raised. I wore the garments. I went to the temple as often as I possibly could. I defended the church. I believed it with wholeheartedly that it was the one and only true church on earth, because that's what I was made to believe. Again, 100% devout. Yes, I had questions. Everybody does, but it didn't change my belief that the church was still true. Okay, so there's that. So to give a bit of a timeline, because I will be kind of jumping back and forth, I started questioning things really heavily about 2 years before leaving, which was about 5 years ago. And there were moments, like little things that didn't really sit right with me, but again, I still believed. So that was about 2020 when I really started heavily, like questioning, like, what the heck? I hope that makes sense. So, the first really large thing that I put on my shelf, I remember actually my first temple experience, which was about a year after I got married, because, we had messed up. We had done the deed before we actually got married. So we had to get married civilly and then wait about a year to get sealed in the temple. After all of the buildup and all the secrecy and, all the talk about how sacred it was, I sat there afterwards and I was like, that's it? Why is that a secret? I don't understand why that's a secret. So obviously, something kind of felt off. But I trusted my parents and my family members and everyone that was in the church. So it had to be true. It had to be true. We're just going to put it on the shelf and I'll worry about that later. I even have family members that were telling me, oh, God will answer all your questions. That's why we go back later. That's why we go back often, to learn more, to learn deeper about these signs and symbols in the church. And I was like, okay, I get that. Shelf. One big problem I did have all growing up was purity culture. The constant message that I was responsible for men's thoughts, that, the length of my sleeves or the length of my skirt would cause a man to stumble, and that it would be my fault if they did. And about 2 years before leaving, I actually started kind of seeing how much blame was really placed on women and how little accountability was placed on men. And that seemed kind of narcissistic to me. But again, shelf, let's talk about that later. But then I actually came across this conference talk, and or I don't know if it was conference, but it was a talk by Dallin H. Oaks, and he said sexual sin is an abomination in the sight of the Lord. Okay, don't have sex, don't do that, and then he specifically spoke to women, young women. Please understand that if you dress immodestly, you are magnifying this problem by becoming pornography to some of the men who see you. Looking at that now, that is victim blaming, and that is very, very, very harmful in the church. Very, very harmful. But because I believed, I took it upon myself to always dress modestly and to never let a man lust after me, because it would be my fault if they did. So I brushed it off and I put it on my shelf. And I will be talking more about purity culture later, so that's going to be in another video. Anyways, moving on. Then some of the things that actually kind of made my shelf a little bit heavy, kind of like putting some cracks in there. Grammar. There were some grammar changes to the Book of Mormon. I actually don't remember I think it was the Book of Mormon, but it could have been the Bible. But in church one day, I think we were like newly married. So it had to be like about 13 years ago, that they had announced over the pulpit that there were going to be grammar changes in the Book of Mormon. And at that time I was like, oh, I thought that, the Book of Mormon or the Bible, it was unchangeable. So I, again, trusted God. I gave it to God and let him take care of it. And then, some time later, President Nelson was sustained to be a prophet. And if I'm being completely honest with you, I did not feel a confirmation. I figured it was me. There had to be something wrong with me. I need to do better. Okay, this is something that I'm going to have to work on. Oh, I'm sorry, I'm judging. I guess I need to, gaslight myself into believing that this was a chosen prophet. Okay. And then soon after that was the name change. No more Mormon. Suddenly there was a rebrand after decades of being proud of that name, Mormon. I honestly remember I'm a Mormon campaigns, all of them. I remember all of them. I loved watching them because we were so proud to call ourselves Mormons. And they're just going to gaslight me into believing that the name change is because it offends God to be called Mormon. Okay, change it to Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. Perfect. Okay. Next one was in 2018, I believe it was. It's give or take a year. But I actually read the book The Saints when it came out. And during that time when I read it, I was like, oh, Joseph Smith had a problem with alcohol? What? Are you serious? Like, what? I was taught all throughout my life that he declined strong drink during his leg surgery as a kid. And as soon as they came out with the word of wisdom, he immediately stopped smoking and chewing tobacco. Nope, that wasn't true. And to me, I was like, what is this? Why was I not told about this? Shelf. Immediately shelf, because, it has to be true. It has to be true. But if I'm being completely honest with you, I kind of felt betrayed in that moment. Like, just that one moment of like, why didn't they tell us this earlier? Like, this doesn't make any sense. Like, it kind of like broke my heart a little bit, Why can't they trust us with this information? Shelf. Then Come Follow Me came around right after COVID hit, and people were calling it a miracle and exaggerating how amazing it was. And to me, it just felt a little bit too orchestrated. And then actually, I'm not going to talk about that. But again, I kind of still brushed it off. And then there are some shelf things that I would talk about, but for time's sake, I'm just going to continue, kind of get on with this. But, and then TikTok's algorithm started algorithming, and it started feeding me content from ex-Mormons. I obviously did not ask for that, but I saw stories from women who were sharing their trauma from their temple experiences, like from Life Take Two, at Life Take Two. I believe her name is Jenny. And then also other creators like Faith Unraveled. Alicia, I freaking love you. You're amazing. And at first I was like, scroll, like, don't watch this. And I told myself that they were just offended. Like, I just kept telling myself, if I did watch the video, they were just offended. Because that's what I'd always been taught when people leave, because they were offended by the church members, or they were deceived by Satan. But your girl is nosy AF, and I had to listen to it, okay? So, but I actually started, feeling something like shift within inside of myself, because I actually believed them. I believed them, as off as it sounded in the time, like, I believed that what they were saying was true. Why would you go on to TikTok and lie about your whole temple experience if it wasn't true? How the temple initiatories used to be, and how their entire experience was completely traumatic, and it was all in the name of God. And at that point, I was obviously a little bit leery to talk to anybody about it, but I kind of showed my husband, and he was like, I had no idea. Like, I didn't know it. Like, I didn't know that's how the temple used to be. But again, put it onto the shelf. Eventually, I slowly started to kind of like scroll through some of it, but not really taking their information seriously. But again, your girl is nosy AF, and I'm going to make decisions about this, but not really fully jump into it. Just kind of put it on my shelf. And then conversations with people that I actually started, that really made me start questioning things very, very seriously. I have a friend. She's my friend. She's my sister, my soul sister. Anyways, she would do my nails pretty often, and she would tell me things like, Joseph Smith had 32 wives, and child brides, and he was a pedo, and he really didn't get killed for the reasons you think. And I was like, whoa, hold on. That is outrageous. You have to be lying, right? Like, this has to be some anti-Mormon stuff. And I was like, okay, I'm just going to take this with a grain of salt, because, in the back of my head, I was like, what if she is telling the truth? Can I conceptualize that? What if she's lying? Shelf. We're going to put that on the shelf. And then about 9 months later, I saw a post of someone that had left the church, someone that I truly trusted and respected. So I actually DM'd her, and I was just, please tell me why you left. I have to know all the details. Why did you leave? And she told me that we weren't being told the full truth within the church, and that I should read the CES letter and the gospel topic essays. So completely honest, I held on to them for a really hot minute, a big hot minute, because I was very resistant to reading them, because I was super scared to actually know what was the truth, because I had lived my whole life with 100% believing that the church was the only true church. But eventually I got tired of waiting, and I just had to know. So I read the CES letter and the gospel topic essays, and it shattered me. I learned that Joseph Smith really did practice polygamy and polyandry, which is very important. The Book of Mormon's translation, that was really translated by a rock and a hat. I literally had no idea. Those two things were the nail in the coffin for me, because just comparing the gospel topic essays and the CES letter, I felt 100% betrayed. And then I learned about Joseph Smith's first vision. There were 4 actual different accounts that were not all the same, not even close. I learned that the temple ceremonies really came from Freemasonry, which I had no idea. The church finances and the paid clergy, some church authority is paid. I literally had no idea. The Book of Abraham translation was false, not even close. And a few other things that I didn't even know about, just a few other things that I didn't even know existed. Every single paragraph, I turned to my husband and said, "You have to read this. Why were we not told any of this?" The betrayal that I had was unmatched. I realized I was not given full consent to choose my own beliefs. The church withheld a lot of information, and they believed would protect my testimony, but it would actually rob me of my informed consent. Things like Joseph Smith marrying 14-year-old girls, the papyri translations being totally false, the golden oxen and the rituals, the handshakes were all from Freemason rituals, feeling so confused about the Holy Ghost, how you're supposed to wait until you're 8, but feeling like the Spirit, the difference between the Spirit and the Holy Ghost, and just all of that. The church leaders do in fact get paid, like the prophets and apostles, but not the bishops. Listen, the bishops, if I were to change anything and people were still able to be in their true church, the bishops need to be paid 100%, because they're giving up so much they're sacrificing so much from their family. That's another topic. Anyways, the betrayal cut deep. And if I were to put into words why I left, it's because the character of Joseph Smith was tainted for me, and because he was the one that founded the church, it shattered everything else for me. It tainted the integrity of the entire church system. It felt like my whole life had been a complete lie. The foundation of my testimony broke, shattered, disintegrated. And the worst part is that so many people I love are still in the church, and they still believe that's the only way to be with your family forever, the only way to true happiness and joy. That is also the true betrayal. And letting go was not the easiest thing. I so badly wanted to stay, But because I couldn't unsee everything, I knew it was going to change everything. My relationships, my worldview, my identity, the core of who I believed I was. It kind of felt like jumping off a cliff with no idea what was at the bottom. But when I did, I literally felt like I could breathe for the first time. I connected with my husband and my kids with no expectations. And this is kind of personal, but when I took off my garments, I felt like I could connect to my own body for the first time in a really, really long time, because the garments were disconnecting me from my own body, my physical body. And when I realized I wasn't walking away from God, I was walking away from a system that said it spoke for God, but didn't act like him. That was one of the biggest reliefs. That was like the biggest relief for me, because I left because the foundation wasn't built on truth, because the church said it valued integrity, but it didn't live it, because it withheld information, justified harm, and gaslit me into believing, it gaslit me when I started asking like honest questions. And the church felt more like a narcissistic, abusive relationship than a divine institution full of control, manipulation, and conditional love disguised as righteousness. So I didn't leave because I felt lost or I lost my faith. I didn't leave because I was offended, because that is far from the truth. I didn't leave because I hated the members or because I was offended by any of the members. In fact, many of the members, many of the people within the church are some of my favorite people. I left because I chose truth. I chose to trust myself. I chose to trust in a version of God that I truly believe in. And I chose to stop abandoning myself and stay in someone else's... Sorry, I said that wrong. I chose to stop abandoning myself to stay in someone else's idea of salvation. So the whole idea here is I chose myself over somebody else's idea of, or somebody else's version of God. I was able to finally choose myself for the first time in my entire life. And that in and of itself absolutely felt so freeing to me. Like, I am the happiest I have ever been. And I am grateful that I was able to leave an institution, a corporation, and actually find myself again. So after leaving, I have not only had to deconstruct Mormonism, or LDS, the Mormon religion, which has taken years, by the way. A lot of time. It made me take a huge step back from religion as a whole. I didn't want to go look for other churches because that story is a little bit too familiar. That's exactly what Joseph Smith did. And then I started to understand that religion is actually man-made. It's a man's way to power, control, and another reason why I also left is because women in the church have absolutely no authority. They don't get to hold the priesthood, even though they say you get to have it in the temple. That's the only place that you can do it. Revelation doesn't always mean truth, and spiritual abuse is real, and gaslighting in the name of God is still gaslighting. So for those who are wondering, I did not stop believing in a higher power because I have had my own spiritual experiences that I was able to separate from the church, that I actually still hold very sacred. And I'm not going to be sharing them on here because it's a little bit too personal. But I still do believe in a higher power, whether you believe it's God, the universe, source. I just don't believe in conditional love anymore. I don't believe that you need special clothes or secret words to be worthy and to enter into heaven, because heaven is already within you. It's a state of mind, and it's what is here now. Like, you being present in this moment is heaven. And I don't need a church to tell me what my soul already knows, because it's funny. I've heard this version of a story so many times that it's just like, duh. Okay. So for example, when a man comes up to you and says, God told me this is something that you should do, and if you don't accept this, if you don't feel good about it, or if you reject it, then you're wrong, because God told me this is how it needs to be, and you need to go along with this, or else you're being influenced by the devil himself, because God told me. Think about that for a second. Like, no. First of all, there is no authority outside of you that knows you more than you know yourself. Second of all, I believe that we are all equal. This is actually something that I found on TikTok that I found absolutely amazing. And in the church systems and in society, everything's like a pyramid, okay? Everything is like a pyramid. All of the people, the important people, are at the top. They have authority over the people underneath them. And it's just like this, hierarchy. I think that's what it's called. And, people at the top are always telling people at the bottom what to do. But in reality, we need to take it, and everybody is equal. Everybody is on the same level. Everybody's on the same level, and we are all equal. Yes, we are all different, and we're all special in our own way, but that doesn't make anybody else better than anybody else. I hope that makes sense. And I believe that we're all doing the best that we can. Nobody stands between me and the divine. I don't need a middleman. In fact, nobody needs a middleman. And if you feel like you do need a middleman, then you just need to learn how to connect to the divine, or the universe, God, because everybody's going to be different. And that is the point of spirituality. It's your own spiritual journey. It's your own way of connecting to a higher power. I think it's actually pretty cool that it's been really fun finding God in places the church told me not to look. Anyways, I just had to put that in there. But anyways, that's it. If you are on this journey too, or if your shelf is getting heavy, or if your shelf broke and you have no idea what to do, you are not alone. There are so many people that are leaving the church right now. It's crazy. You are not crazy. You're not broken. You're brave. You get to ask the questions, you get to change, you get to heal. And I just want to say I love you for who you are, for where you are. Like, this is a big step. If you've seen this, and if you're like, oh my gosh, I need to get on my spiritual journey, I do have emotion code, body code, belief code sessions that kind of help you deconstruct and release all of the negative subconscious beliefs, the negative trapped emotions. That's also going to be available in the description below. Just putting that out there, because I know some people need a little extra help. I'm not going to talk to God for you. That's your job. But I'm more than happy to help you release the negative energy that's got you all confused. And then I do have to say that up next, I'm so excited about this, because it's so on point when it comes to spirituality versus religion, and how I believe that the 10 Commandments were actually twisted by religion, and how it needs to be looked at from a spiritual perspective instead. So thank you so much for watching. I am so grateful for every single one of you, and thank you so much for being here, a part of this healing journey. See you on the next video. I will see you later. Bye.